Hello and welcome to The Agenda Live with me and Phil Moorhouse, who's kindly donated his time to come talk to us today about CPTPP. To give it its short name. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Phil?
It was better originally. So it's the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Pacific, that ocean we're not in. And it was just going to be called the Trans-Pacific Partnership when the United States were involved. Yeah. And then Donald Trump became president and he decided he didn't want America. And that might be a good reason. I've no idea, just because he got every other decision wrong. So then they went ahead without America, and it was all a bit rushed. And it ended up being the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I can only imagine it wasn't going to be comprehensive or progressive while America were involved. And essentially, you could argue it's a collection of common free trade agreements, which don't do a great deal. You've got, in return for being a member, we will have to accept rules on, for example, how we decide our standards. So this argument about, we should be able to set our own rules here, decide our own rules here. That's why we left the EU. They shouldn't tell us about standards. Well, the CPTPP are going to do that. And also they are literally telling us, because with the EU, we were part of the decision-making process, and 98% of EU rules were either made up or supported by the UK government at the time. Yeah, because we were one of the big players in it, and not a lot happens without one of the big players, or usually two or three of the big players pushing it. And then the other thing is about tariffs. So again, the Conservatives are touting it as a tariff-free deal. A lot of our exports will be tariff-free, but just as our trade and cooperation agreement with the EU, it's only tariff-free if the goods meet rules of origin. And I think the rules for that are a little bit stricter for the CPTPP. But essentially, if we're making our own stuff, then we should be able to export it tariff-free. However, there are certain things that are excluded from that individual member states think are particularly important to them. So rice, for example, for Japan. Now, we don't want to export rice to Japan, so we don't care about that. That's probably more of an issue for like Malaysia. But Canada has special arrangements for dairy products. So if we think we're going to be exporting a load of cheese to Canada tariff-free, we can think again. But you can accept that most of the stuff we would want to export to these countries will be done tariff-free. However, we were already doing it at very low tariffs anyway. So how much extra are we really going to be selling when there's going to be effectively a small drop in the tariffs to countries that are, you'll know better than I do. Canada, you can go straight across the Atlantic Ocean to get to the east coast.
Yeah, that's fairly easy.
Probably a lot of people live there.
If you're a strong swimmer, yeah.
But anywhere else, I'm trying to think. You've got to, if you want to go to, say, Chile, you've got to go all the way down the Atlantic, well, through the Panama Canal probably, and then you're going down the Pacific a little bit more. But anywhere else, you're probably having to go not only all the way down the Atlantic Ocean, but then across the Indian Ocean as well. Yep,
they're at least two oceans away.
Yeah. So and they go by boat. So we lose the just-in-time supply chain. We've already lost it. We don't have one. We're not part. So British production, British manufacture is already screwed over because we are no longer part of any just-in-time supply chain. And that's important because no country can really provide all of the materials and components it needs for its own manufacturing base. Yeah. And when it comes to food, of course, non-starter. If you cannot get fresh food in from your own continent, you're not going to get it from two oceans away.
This is crazy, though. It goes back to this argument that I was having with people during the Brexit wars, where I was saying to them, who are we going to trade with? And they were like, the rest of the world. Like, this was this wonderful opportunity for us. And every time I explained, there's only about 6 countries in the rest of the world that are worth trading with. Really, because they're the countries that have got the money to buy the stuff that we want to sell them, and they're kind of close enough for us to actually sell them stuff. I'm like, there's 150 countries out there that are, there. But when it comes to our trade and increasing our trade with isn't this this deal? It's worth 0.08% to our economy over 10 years. We trade more with Belgium.
Well, it got even better. I don't know whether you've seen Kemi Badenoch, the cabinet minister most trade to it. She's done a few car crash interviews today.
Yes, I was going to ask if you've seen them.
Yeah, one was with Nick Ferrari where he was quoting this 0.08%, and she was going, "Oh no, it's not really that." And oh, great, is it more than that? She says, "Well, I don't want to get into that." So, she said it depends on how we use the deal. She said if we don't. She said the 0.08% boost was if we just do things as we are now. It'll just naturally create this. And 0.08%, by the way, can be a rounding error.
That's actually
over 10 years,
yeah.
Over 10 years, 0.08% could well be minus 0.5%. Who knows?
Yeah.
But what she said, and she's quite right. You have to. But how are we going to use the deal properly? It relies. If she even mentioned it in the interview, but I was reading something by a think tank, which, as far as I know, is an independent think tank, the British Foreign Policy Group. And their closing statement is basically, in order to really get anything out of this, and Kemi Badenoch said the same thing in this interview, we're sort of reliant on more countries joining it. So the deal as it is now, with the countries as it is now, everyone recognises is you might as well have it as not. If we're going to be outside, it's not a replacement for the EU, but if you're going to be outside of the EU single market and customs union, sure, unless you're a farmer, in which case, of course, you hate it. Or if your job relies on agriculture, of course, you hate this. This is no good for you. But by and large, taking the overall economy, I don't think the Tories care about that. Tories don't really do well in rural areas, do they? So I'm sure they don't mind.
No.
But it's reliant on other countries joining this group.
Yeah, indeed. And I just want to jump into the chat while I can. David Faulkner, thank you very much. $38 super chat from Hong Kong, saying shift the location of your island. Come join us here in Asia. Yeah, I'll just ship it down the Panama Canal. It's small enough; it'll fit. A big shout out
to get rid of the DUP if we put outboard motors on the north of Scotland and move ourselves 2 oceans away.
Indeed. Aaron said that half of them are already there are already trade deals with half of the countries in the CPTPP, which is, as people are pointing out, is a bit of a mouthful. And also he's saying that it's a so-called conservative estimate, so slightly rounded up. Lee Korn is just giving us face palms. And Freckle Puny saying, wait 100 million years or so, Great Britain may relocate, I guess, to the Pacific due to tectonic plate motions. Job done. It's madness, isn't it? It's absolute.
Well, and they're going on about so some of these economies are emerging economies, and as they say in various policy papers, a growing middle class population. So the suggestion is that some of these countries over time will have more consumer power and they may want to buy more goods, but they're also culturally quite different. So again, just as goods from Malaysia for us, unless it's like stuff that's produced in sweatshops like clothes, but if you're talking about actual Malaysian products, they're sort of exotic for us. It's something you might have now and then. It's not really part of our normal shopping experience. So we're the same to them. What are we actually going to export? And some have said, some more self-aware Brexiteers have tried to push services. They said, well, we're really a service-based economy. So what do we get from? I can't really find anything. The government has said, it unlocks better access to services. And I'm thinking, well, there aren't really that many trade barriers to services around the world.
No.
So what specifically we've gained here? I'll
tell you one barrier with services is time zones. I keep mentioning this. I had a friend in Australia and she worked for a American company. And so her office hours were like 10 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning. That was her office hours, because she had to be in the office when the people in America are in the office. So if you're going to have a live 24/7 trading relationship on a service level, it's very difficult when people in Japan, people in New Zealand, people in Australia are asleep, or we're asleep. And it's like, why would you do that when we've got all these countries on our doorstep that are rich?
Yeah.
But yeah, the stuff that Kimmy Badenoch was coming out with this morning were all the reasons that being a member of the EU was good. She was like, yeah, it's better to be part of a team. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God.
See, part of me wonders, because most Tory MPs were only blindsided into this anyway, and I don't really know about Badenoch. I know she was a sort of a Brexiteer. But I wonder if they knew they were blindsided into it by UKIP, and they probably overblew the threat from UKIP anyway.
Yes.
And they don't mind it at all if the public was to suddenly decide we should rejoin the EU, because then they can all stop talking crap. But it does. It's all the people trying to argue for it. None of them can say how it's going to benefit in anything like the foreseeable future. They're all talking about these predictions later. Like Dmitry Grozobinski, who's a trade expert, is saying, or his former diplomat is saying here, I'll tidy the language up. He says, the same idiots who were in my mentions 4 years ago telling me the UK GDP $3.1 trillion would hold all the cards in negotiation with the EU, $16.6 trillion GDP. And the same people dismissed any economic modelling as quackery, and now spamming me with a World Bank prediction of CPTPP GDP by 2050. So the same ones who says you can't predict things in like 3 or 4 years' time are now brandishing like extrapolated data, trying to go 25 years into the future.
I met Dimitri when we were doing Three Blokes in the Pub, when we went over to Geneva to talk to the people at the place in Geneva that I'm not allowed to mention that we went to. But yeah, he was absolutely on the money. And he's Australian. He's Australian trade expert. And he was all over this from the start. He was just like, Brexit from the start. He was just like, this is absolute nonsense. But do you think that now, I mean, I've seen a few interviews with people talking about it, which we were saying earlier, when we were chatting, it's a bit mad that like anyone's heard of it, because it is quite technical and like who really cares. But people were just not very impressed with what the Tories have done. They kind of gone, ta-da! And it's like an empty box. And do you think more people are waking up, more Tory voters, maybe Brexit voters, are waking up to the reality of just how terrible this deal is?
In terms of this deal, most people won't have heard it. If I go out and ask people on the street, they haven't heard of this. It's not even got a catchy name. They've got no real chance. The other thing is,
no catchy name.
It's not even really been covered in the Tory press. They can't be arsed with it.
Yeah.
Someone, there was a guy, I can't remember who it was, some idiot who reckons he's trying to pretend to be a trade expert, and he's writing the Daily Telegraph, and he says this is going to send economic shockwaves through the world. And I looked at the front page of the papers. I'm looking at the Financial Times front page today. It's China warns Europe. There's something about Humza Yousaf there, bonuses for Wall Street traders. Nothing on the front page about CPTPP. I went on to their online news thing. They've got all their top stories there, 8 or 9 top stories. Not a single one is this. They'll have a story on it. They'll cover it in the arse end of nowhere on their website. But it's not a big deal. Everyone knows it's not a big deal. You're not going to see much written about it in economic journals, other than you might as well have it as not. If you're a farmer, that's bad luck. And that's it. We'd have been better off staying in the EU.
Yeah. It is kind of crazy. Let me jump into the comments, because we're getting loads of comments in here. We've already had over 100. Freckle Puny says, I said that one. Pineapple Boy says, if the EU as a whole joins, then our trade might go up by 4%. So you talk about expansion, and someone else, Mark, saying that Pineapple is genius at trade. Yoni, you jumped in to say it's not half of the countries, it's 9 out of the 11 countries we already have trade deals with. And then we've got Aaron saying, what did JOB call the Tories recently? Behaving like an out-of-control showerhead, making everyone wet but no one really happy. And Freckle Puny saying, Some Brexiteers are claiming joining the CPTPP means the UK can never rejoin the EU, which isn't true. If this is the case, then bang goes the sovereignty Brexiteers claimed they wanted. But that's not true. I mean, there's nothing to stop us.
We'd have to leave the CPTPP.
Yeah.
Obviously, but we will do that in a heartbeat. And it wouldn't... See, when we
But
originally
what about the
joined EEC,
0.08% of our GDP? Over 10 years.
It won't even be that. I bet you in 10 years' time, it's not even that.
God,
it might even be negative. That'd be hilarious. But they will have screwed over farmers. And in 10 years' time, it obviously, I wouldn't expect, I would hope not anyway, I wouldn't expect it to be the Conservatives in office. And this is what will happen as well. This is what will happen. So, and people need to prepare for this, the next phase of Brexit. So at the moment, Brexiteers are coming up with all sorts of excuses why Brexit isn't working. Oh, this is the future, but you have to wait for 2050. But in a couple of years' time, when it's a Labour government, all of a sudden it'll be Labour's fault.
Yes.
So at the moment,
yes,
it's because the Tories aren't really proper Brexiteers. We haven't Brexited enough, or any number of other reasons, or we just have to be more patient. Depends who you ask.
You got to believe.
In a couple of years' time,
Phil, you've got to believe. If you only believe, then you can fly, literally.
Yes, I shouldn't advise having that sort of attitude near cliffs. But
it is a bit mad. Do you know what else as well that's quite upsetting about all this is that they are reducing regulations. This whole thing is about the bonfire of regulations. So it means that food coming into the country is going to be of a lower standard.
Yes.
We already have problems with our children's health as it is, and this is going to open the floodgates possibly to more nonsense coming in. But the real one for me was the eradication of tariffs on palm oil, which in Malaysian Borneo and particularly in Indonesian Borneo is absolutely devastating the rainforest there, destroying the natural habitat of thousands, if not millions of species, including the orangutan, which is soon going to have literally nowhere to live because they need a big range to be able to just do what they do. And it just seems like needlessly cruel. But then again, I guess that just sums up the last 13 years of these Tories in government. It's just needlessly cruel. What needlessly cruel thing can we do today? Oh, let's kill all the orangutans. Oh, yeah, great. We're up for that.
Well, I mean, they did it to win an election. They were worried about UKIP. And they thought, all right, well, we'll destroy the UK then so we can win a couple of elections before it disappears under the waves.
Yeah. I'll jump into the chat a little bit more. I think the stealth launch is deliberate. They don't want too much scrutiny. That's from Mark. Badbones777 said, I think so. My mum and dad voted Brexit. Very much regret it now. My ma fell for the NHS money, caused a few rows that. Yeah, maybe people are changing their minds finally. The Freckle Puny wants to know, where's the referendum to join the CPTPP? Where's the parliamentary vote?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It was, not only has there not been a referendum, you'd get away with it if it was at least in the manifesto, because you write a manifesto, you win a majority, you are automatically deemed to have a mandate for any crazy ideas in that manifesto, which is how the Conservatives have got away with quite a lot of their authoritarian legislation, because a fair amount of it was in the manifesto. Not a single word or even implication, nothing, not a sausage in their 2019 manifesto. I've scoured it again recently.
Oh, you have too much time on your hands, Phil. I mean, bloody hell.
Oh, yeah.
Did you wash your eyeballs afterwards?
At no point has it ever been put to the people. The people, as I say, if I went out, people won't even know what it is. What is it? Yeah. I was amazed when GB News were able to post some clips of people they were asking, I think it was in Birmingham, who were all of them saying, well, what is this? This is worthless, isn't it? And I thought, how did they even find anyone who knows what it is? Because it's not being covered in the news. Why would it? It's boring.
Well, it was on the BBC today. They actually had as a headline 0.08%.
Oh, I saw Anne-Marie Trevelyan actually linking that BBC article off the website. And I thought, why would you like applaud it and then link an article where it actually says in the headline worth 0.0%?
Worth nothing.
Who's going to be
worthless trade deal?
Even if someone, like no one's going to think that's impressive. I mean, there's plenty of people when you sort of say about the forecast for Brexit costing us 4% of GDP over the long term. At the moment, it's more like 5.5%, but it's expected to sort of even out a bit. I mean, you can say that to some people and think, oh, it's only 4%, isn't it? So, of course, they're not going to be impressed with 0.08%. And as I say, 0.08% can be a rounding error.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know that it's going to be worth that in 10 years' time. All we know is it's worth 0 at the moment. And that even the Secretary of State, who's been championing this deal on interviews today, says that in order for us to get anything out of it, it's sort of dependent on other countries joining the group.
Yeah.
She didn't say which ones. She mentioned a couple, but I don't think, and there's a couple of contradictory things as well, because in some quarters in the Tory party, they're talking about it as being, it's geostrategic because now we can stop China joining it. And you've got other quarters saying, but the benefit is being able to get access to the Chinese market when they do join.
Yeah.
Well, which is it? Is it anti or pro-Chinese? and the idea that we're going to get any significant access into the Chinese market, whatever, is ridiculous because they are
incredibly protectionist, off the
so,
charts
so
protectionist. So I was once in China. My video camera stopped working, and the production company I was working with sent me a new camera, and we couldn't get it into the country. It was cheaper to literally buy a camera in China.
You're only allowed to show so many Western movies in the cinemas in China. That's how protectionist they are.
Yeah. I think that's more to do with government censorship than trade barriers. But a lot of people who try to drive from Scotland to Sydney or whatever always come a cropper when they try and go through China because of the tariffs that are put on vehicles coming into China. You've basically got to pay for the worth of the car to bring it in, and then you might get that back when you leave. Maybe, who knows? But I know a couple who they drove from Milan to Melbourne. When they got to Tibet, they got to Nepal. They were trying to drive over the Himalayas to Tibet. And they ended up having to send their car. It was only one of those little tiny little Citroen cars, the little joke ones. Oh no, a little tiny Fiat. It was a Fiat 500. Those little tiny Fiats. It was one of them, and they had to airship it to Thailand because that was cheaper than driving it through China. That's a little anecdote for you, but yeah. I had stories of them trying to get it into the shipping crate, and it was like a couple of inches too big, so they had to take off the bumpers and then whack the back of it with a hammer to close the doors at the back.
But I have no idea who they're hoping is going to join it. Where was I? I can't really see anything, but everyone. Let's have a look here. Ecuador, Taiwan, apparently Uruguay may be interested in joining. They've already applied. But I don't know what we would expect to export to them, more so than we already are doing. Well, yeah, but the same with Chile. You've got to get it through Brazil, at least. Yeah. No, I mean, the particular page of it, and I did a video, and I can remember the page number to this day because I did a video specifically on it. The worst part of it is page 48, which contained a lot of it's basically the part of the manifesto they actually wanted to do, and it's all the authoritarian legislation, all the removing our rights, the stuff that didn't win them a single vote, but because that's what you do with the manifesto. You have all your vote winning policies, you put those in. Then you put in a load of policies that you actually want, but you don't really talk about them in the election because people don't want them. But by putting it in the manifesto, you have a mandate when you win, and therefore you get it through the House of Lords really easily. And so when people sort of say, why have the Lords been letting a lot of this legislation through, it's because because people voted for it. People are deemed to have voted for it because it was in the manifesto. And, and I said, in 2019, when they won that majority, I was very, very worried about what was going to happen, because at the time you couldn't have imagined Labour, even with a more focused leader and a more focused membership, winning the following election, because they were reduced to like 200 seats. So you looked at it and you thought the best case scenario is we massively reduce the Tories' majority to the point where Tory rebels cause problems for them and then try and win the following election. You couldn't have imagined actually getting rid of them in 5 years. And all of a sudden we're in the position where we're quite likely to get rid of them. So I'm not as worried as I was. I seriously had considered emigrating to Ireland.
That's actually a really good idea.
If I was still single, I think I'd have considered it very seriously.
Yeah, I think I would have gone to Panama if I was still single. Sorry, my sound cut out there, Phil. You could hear me, but the viewers at home could not.
Oh dear.
Sorry about that, but I obviously I can't tell because I don't get a feedback in my ear of my own voice, thankfully. Although you have to listen to it. So thank you very much, everyone who let us know in the chat there that was a problem. The Freckle Puny says, I've heard business people say how hard doing business in China is due to cultural difference and the fact that so many firms are part or fully government owned. I mean, it's for the birds, isn't it? This idea that we're going to have this great trading relationship with China.
Yeah.
And like a steamroller us.
Oh, yeah, the United States pretends to be just like the Tories do, interested in free market capitalism, but it's an absolute nonsense. So,
well, I mean, they've got so many monopolies over there at the moment, and powerful lobbies that can get away with literal murder.
Of course, and so in terms of breaking into these, and they are the only two economies larger than the EU. So that's it. We haven't really got anything, and it's not even like they're coming up with figures. Oh, but the CPTPP, if you put it all together, is worth this, and it's like, but the problem is that our market access is not as good as it was for the EU. So you can't even just compare the amount of trade, because all we've done is reduce tariffs a little bit. We haven't done anything to make it easier to move the goods there. We haven't done anything to increase, the desirability of it. And as you say, with services, time zones and things, but even beyond that, it's like I'm still trying to find anything that specifically helps our service sector. I'm sure there's bound to be something that helps it a little, because that 0.08% has to come from somewhere. Yeah, and I'll bet it's not really from goods.
No. Well, someone's suggesting in the chat that UK education could be a service export. That's Colin in the chat. Yeah, I mean, this is a big thing at the moment because a lot of the private schools in the UK, the old public schools, are very concerned about the fact that Labour are planning to bring in VAT and also charge these so-called charities income tax or corporation tax, whatever. And as a result, they are investing heavily in sending and in having these like Harrow School. Dubai, Harrow School, Eton School, Thailand and things, which are private schools. Obviously, they're run from the UK. They're part of the UK network. But one of the things I think that is a little bit mad is that you've got countries like Vietnam for whom copyright and intellectual property is a foreign concept, and so there's not really that much stopping me and you from setting up Harrow School Hanoi,
right?
With the correct letterheads and all that kind of stuff. So there's an opportunity for you there, Phil. You fancy getting back into teaching?
I probably don't have the seed money for that.
You could probably get it. Badbone777 is saying, at this point I'll happily let Ireland hack Liverpool off the mainland and weld us onto the side. I'll be happy about that as well. Fruit Bat Cat says, I've applied for Irish citizenship, 2-year wait just to register foreign birth before even applying for passport. They're overwhelmed.
Yes.
Donald Cowie is saying, would just sitting folks down with copy of manifestos, which party is removed, and see who gets It's just sitting people down with a copy of a manifesto, but the party name is removed from the manifesto, and see who gets the most votes. I think that's a good way of doing it.
Someone usually does things like this. They even did it in 2019. You did get actually a few journalists who sometimes they're even cheeky, and they do it to the actual MPs. They remove the sticker, so to speak, and they present them with policies and ask which ones are their party's policies. So you do sometimes get little cheeky games like that.
Yeah.
But it's. I mean, it would be good if they just read the manifestos. I mean, I know most don't,
but most people don't. Most people have got better things to do at the time. I mean, a lot of people don't even bother voting. Full stop. So,
well, a good third. No, it is a shame. People keep asking me. I do say I do agree. I know we'd never get away with it here, but if we had like Australia, compulsory voting, that would help a great deal, because the people who tend not to vote.
I disagree with that, because in Australia, the Liberal Party, which is the Conservative Republican Party over there, wins all the freaking time, because you force people who have no interest in politics whatsoever, except they watch this one YouTube video once, to go and vote. So it's not like...
Yeah, but in this country, the ones who don't vote largely are young people. They're not going to vote Tory.
Well, they do. That's the thing. That's what happens in Australia, because the people who don't care about politics don't care. They'll just vote for whoever's on the top of the paper because they have to.
So that's fine. That just means that Labour only select candidates called Aaron A. Aardvark.
Win every time.
Not a problem.
But no, I don't know if that's... I don't think if forcing political participation is something that we need to do. I do think that PR is something that we need, so people feel like their vote is counted. One of the big sort of arguments for the Brexit vote and the things that turned out was the fact that a lot of people put an X on a bit of paper, and for the first time in their lives, it actually changed something. It actually made something happen. Whereas most people live in safe constituencies that have been either Tory or Labour for years and years and years, and they just don't feel engaged in politics because they don't feel like their voice is being listened to.
A lot of the time, and well, part of the reason for that is because the vast majority of voters aren't part of the voting process, even the ones who do vote. Because for a start, in 3/4 of all the constituencies, it's not changing hands, even when you're going to have a change of government. So there's going to be more seats changing hands than normal. 3/4 of them are not going to.
Wow.
In the ones that do, it's a lot of people are going to vote out of habit. And of those who may not vote out of habit, they're going to vote for a candidate who has no chance. So by the time you get down to someone who is the only voters who count are the voters in a seat that could swing one way or the other, who are choosing between the credible candidates. Now, that's usually between 2 candidates. It occasionally is between 3. And that's it. Those are the only people who are, and that's a few 100,000 from 30 odd million voting.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? We've got Aaron saying PR could help, the less feeling of wasting your vote, reiterating what I was saying there. And also, not 50 Damius, says lower the voting age to 16. Something else that I would support. If you're talking about getting people into politics, the earlier you get them into it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So I would definitely vote for that.
16 is the voting age in Scotland. Obviously, it can't be for Westminster because that has to be a UK-wide system. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it quite soon. Obviously, we know Labour are after some fairly beefy reforms. They're focusing on the House of Lords at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably because it's less. I think any form of voting, any sort of electoral reform or reform of government is going to be contentious. But I think that's probably the least contentious. But I think there might be other things following. Reducing voting age is an easy one.
It is. That's an easy win. I think PR's an easy win because it'll ensure the Tories are locked out of power
if you can get it.
Unless they team up with a more progressive party. Because there just isn't the votes on the hard right. They make a lot of noise and they own the newspapers, but in terms of actual numbers of votes, the hard right is really,
you have to be able to implement it though. And the two ways to implement it is a manifesto, and they might see. I don't rule out. Obviously, we know amongst the membership, people are now just sick of it and want PR. Even the unions have come on board.
Yeah,
but
well, not all of them.
Not all of them now, but enough of them.
Enough of them. Over half.
And the leadership is cool on it, but we don't know. Is that because they're not going to go for it next parliament? They may do the one after. Because the way I see it strategically is, it could be vote negative, because at the moment you can say, Phil, look at polling. There's a majority in favour of proportional representation. There was a majority in favour of remaining in the EU until certain people who basically control our media decided to throw out the kitchen sink at a campaign to get people to leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that establishment is absolutely committed to maintaining first past the post.
Yeah.
So you cannot rule out that if Labour were to back it for the next election, it could snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And obviously they don't want to do that. But you could argue that for the following election, because what would happen is you would probably get, if you promised proportional representation, not a review. The problem is, like when Blair sort of tentatively, he promised a review, which we got, and then nothing happened.
Yeah.
But if we actually promise proportional representation, albeit with a public consultation on which form it should take, but that there will be proportional representation before the next election, you would get a lot of Green and Lib Dem voters voting Labour just to get it done one last time. But we just don't know how many. It is a tricky one. It's like, for me, it's the most important policy, because nothing that Labour can do in government, not if they were in government for 20 years, and they won't be under the current system, but nothing they can do can be protected from the Tories just destroying it all within 5 years when they come back in.
Yeah, that's
because I've now lived through this. I've lived through Labour years, and I look back and I think, what's left? Basically nothing. There's some legislation that gives some people some rights they didn't previously have, and that's it. Public services are broken again, and they weren't completely fixed at the end of it.
Yeah,
but they're now completely. There's nothing that Labour can do.
Yeah,
that they can maintain.
That, I mean, if they brought in PR, they wouldn't be able to, the Tories wouldn't be able to get rid of it. It's well worth future-proofing everything that Labour does, and just ensuring that the Tories.
So it's
can't
how you win an
record.
election with such a policy, because the only alternative is a referendum, and they should. Yeah. That could win. That could be riskier.
I wouldn't have a referendum on vote. I mean, we had that earlier in the last decade, didn't we? Where we had the vote on the alternative vote system. Yeah,
but that was a dog's dinner. First of all, the system was crap.
It was.
Second of all, the Lib Dems were crap. And third of all, Labour was still pearl clutching, so they didn't help at all.
No, it would have. I think it would have helped. I think it would have made more people vote and get involved and stuff.
It would be better. But all you're doing is it's really the same as Northern Ireland used for Stormont, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
And that it's not proportional representation.
Yeah.
So what I want is
but I saw it as a step on the way to proportional representation. But you're right, Tony Blair, his government, they missed the trick. They should have brought in PR, at least in the third election that they won. Just put it in the manifesto. They were going to win anyway. It was a given. Just get that in there, and then in the last 150 years, I think Labour have been in charge for 33 of them.
Is it even that?
Yeah,
but it's. I mean, this is why I would bring it in if I was a Labour. See, I want them to bring it in now just so that I can think, phew, that's done. But assuming they could win it, I wouldn't thank them for putting it in and then losing the election. But if I was thinking strategically, I would probably say do it on the second election that way. Yeah. So you have a full parliament, probably not a full parliament. Usually it's 4 years, but you have a parliament to start to embed the reforms you want. Then in the next election, you promise proportional representation. So then you win a majority again, hopefully, and then you've got a whole second term to bed everything in.
Yeah.
After which you are not going to win enough to have the same level of power. So you are going to have to form a coalition, but that coalition realistically will not seek to rewind your reforms. So you will be. So that's that's where the coalition comes in.
Sorry, you dropped out there for some reason. The title. Sorry, Phil, you dropped out there. That some reason the title screen decided to come back on randomly. Sorry about that, everyone. But yeah, you were just saying.
Yeah, I was just saying if you do it in the second election, you give yourself 2 full terms of majority power.
Yeah.
And if you cannot in 8 or 9 years bed in everything you want to do, then I really don't know what you're playing at. So, and then when you have to form a coalition after the following election, that coalition may not agree with the future work you want to do, so you may have to compromise on things, but it will not rewind the reforms you've already put in.
I'm going to just jump into the comments here. We've got Zilandi saying, someone on Phil's last video on the CPTPP asked if the UK still produces anything. Does a worthless political class count?
I don't think they want our politicians. I'd be more than happy to give them Boris Johnson for free, but the only people who want him are America, and they're not in the CPTPP.
We've got Johnny saying Tories tend to break manifesto promises with monotonous regularity. That is very true. Freckle Puny's saying we also need better political education in this country. I'd make teaching politics, economics and law compulsory. Which is I find a bit draconian, and there are a lot of really good car mechanics who wouldn't do very good at that, but are really great at fixing cars.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, the Conservatives would be dead against it. Second of all, would you have the teachers to be able to teach it properly?
Yeah,
it's a bit like the problem with programming. In the 80s, we used to teach. I learned programming at school.
Really?
When I was very young. And then in the 80s, Thatcher stopped it because she asked business, the stupid businesses, what we should be teaching kids. And they didn't say programming. They said just teach them how to use software. So that's why, for the following generation, you had bright kids learning how to use Word. And then we realized a few years ago that we used to be one of the challengers in the global computing market, and all of a sudden we weren't. Do you think that's because we stopped teaching computing? We should teach it again, but we don't have people to teach it because we didn't learn those skills.
Right, because I didn't.
We don't have enough teachers.
When I was in school in the 90s, we had to do technology for GCSE, but it was so bodged under the. It was only for 1 year that you had to do it, and as a result of that, I had to drop geography. So I've got a GCSE in history, but I don't have one in geography. And it's like, you can't understand history unless you understand geography. They go really, really hand in hand in a lot of ways, but, whatever. But yeah, the technology test that we had for GCSE, it was mostly about it was like CDT. It was about woodwork and bending bits of acrylic. And it wasn't about programming or how to actually code anything. But I'm thinking back to the 80s, all those specky games that were made by people in the bedrooms, just coding themselves on BASIC.
In my junior school, we had a BBC Micro. You were taught programming at junior school, and then in comprehensive school, for the first couple of years, we were still being taught programming, albeit in BASIC. And then it disappeared. It just gone.
Print. Phil is a meth.
I've forgotten it.
20, go to 10.
I used to like programming, and then I hated it. When I went to university, it would have actually been useful to me. I hated it. I hated it so much that I studied, like your partner's an astrophysicist, isn't that right?
Yeah.
I studied astrophysics.
She's not, sorry, my partner, she's just a physicist. Right. She did her PhD on lasers.
All right. Okay.
Lasers.
Well, I did astrophysics, and obviously I did all the normal physics as well, but I didn't do a PhD. And I had the opportunity to use not the big radio telescope at Geographical Bank, but the smaller one for students. Yeah. I would have had to learn Fortran, and by that time I was sick of programming, so I didn't want to anymore. But we were.
That sounds a bit like Fortran. Don't want to be going there.
Fortran, and So, but we, I tell you what, I have a little story from university though. So we did all as a compulsory thing, have to do some basic. And it's so long since I'd done any, I had actually forgotten a lot of it.
Yeah.
And in the test, which we did on computers, I actually copied from the person in front of me, and they weren't very happy because I got a higher score than they did. Because obviously I was using their knowledge plus some of my own that they didn't have.
Cheeky.
But it wasn't formal thing, so it didn't matter. It is matter, to be dishonest. But I have to remember I'm a teacher now. I can't condone cheating. But it didn't count to any formal qualification. But yeah, stopping that was absolute madness. It destroyed a British industry.
Yeah,
and
well, one of the many things
this,
that destroyed British industry. I mean, also the fact
and
that
just by asking the wrong people what the future economic needs were, because it is fair to ask, because that is really the practical purpose of school. There's all sorts of things that we should teach kids, but the practical purpose of it is to make good economically productive units. That is how you justify it.
Yeah.
But if you ask the wrong people, you end up with a mess. So now we don't have the teachers who can teach the programming because those same teachers weren't taught programming at school. So fewer people go into programming, which means the one who then study it and go to university, there's better paid jobs actually doing programming. There's not enough spare to teach it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you always get this problem when the government have a mad idea. They go, oh, we're going to have more nurses. And it's like, well, who are going to teach the nurses? And who's going to pay for it? And they're like, well, we're not. I mean, they can pay for it themselves. And you're like, so what? You're going to get nurses to be put into a job, to rack up loads of debt before going into a job which pays so badly that many nurses are forced to use food banks just to keep their children fed.
If they want to stay here, because of course, if they go to other countries around the world, they'll be paid a lot higher. So will doctors.
Yes. Yeah.
So they can study here and then piss off to Australia, as long as they don't want to take their life into their hands when they go to the toilet. If they don't mind that, fine.
Yeah. There's a few people disagreeing with 16-year-olds being able to vote. There's some agreeing with it, though, saying 16-year-olds no more than 60-year-olds sometimes. Aaron's saying PR would fundamentally change the foundation of politics in the UK, which I completely agree. It would allow a overdue restart of Britain. And I think that is the slogan that Labour needs is either reboot Britain or restart Britain, because we need to control alt delete this place.
As I say, what they have to do to win, what you always have to do to win, is you have to identify who are the voters who are going to make the difference between you winning and losing, and you have to focus on them. And a lot of people, myself included, don't like some of the rhetoric. I do argue there is a difference between their rhetoric and if you look at the detail of their policy. Yeah. But that's because they're targeting a group of people who are not natural Labour supporters or even sympathisers. They're targeting people who, for the last 13 years, have been voting Tory.
Exactly.
And if you have proportional representation, you instantly, overnight, change who the voters are you need to target, which inevitably then changes the message.
Yeah, it does indeed. Just back into the comments here. Emmy's saying, hey all, so if I have this right, my 4-year-old will be 31 before we double the benefits in GDP from the CPTPP. PPTPP. Yeah. It's just another nothing burger. Riddery wants to give everyone a Voight-Kampf test at the door into the voting centre. That will solve everything because of all those bloody replicants out there. Aaron says, plus a lot of the Tories left a lot of fallout behind, and some of it's not even arrived yet, which is true. If you look at the knock-on effects of what the Tories did in the 60s, we're seeing that with the carnage on the railways at the moment and the motorway systems, where there's just the motorways are falling apart because it was so badly built in the first place, because it was all the Tories' mates doing it. And then in the 80s, they, as Phil was just saying, they wrecked industry, and now they've wrecked the economy, and it is going to take decades to sort out their mess. And I keep saying the Tories don't know how to create anything; they only know how to destroy. And you touched on this earlier, Phil, when you said about the destroyed everything that Labour did. We were talking the other day about the Sure Start schemes, about the New Deal for musicians, all gone.
I mean, they're talking about people retraining at the moment. So my teaching career basically spanned roughly Well, it spanned the Labour years and then most of the Tory years. Obviously, I stopped a couple of years ago. And during the Labour years, we started to see investment coming in. You could see it. We were getting lots of money. For me, for example, every year I was expected to go on 2 or 3 training sessions away, which cost money. As soon as the Tories came in, that all stopped. That didn't mean to say we never had training, but all of our training was like in-house. So we got like safeguarding training, and it was for local agencies who would come in and give it for free. There was no being sent away on a course that would cost money to upskill. That disappeared overnight. Other resources disappeared overnight. And then teachers and teaching assistants more recently have started to disappear. So there isn't the staff anymore to teach properly. You know, I mean, what's the difference in a private and a state school? Private school, you've got one teacher to like 15 kids. State school.
Also,
and Labour brought the class sizes
they don't have to pay tax.
30.
They get their musical education subsidised by us. So if you go to a state school, you got to pay for it, but in a private school, it's part of the deal. And obviously, you don't have to pay the VAT on your school fees. And also, someone's just said in the chat that they teach coding in a private school that their son goes to, which is nice because they don't have to follow the national curriculum, and they don't have to be inspected by Ofsted if they don't want to be.
Yeah.
Great. You know that same Ofsted organisation that drove a teacher to suicide recently?
I have actually written a script for that. I shall be talking about that at some point. My thoughts about that, just to explain exactly where Ofsted go wrong. But yeah, I mean, the idea of having a school, I don't care what sort of school it is, a school that doesn't have to be subject to any form of inspection is ridiculous.
And a lot of these schools, abuse is rife, and historic abuse has been found out about teachers.
Oh, they'd be found.
And even though these are private profit-making enterprises, like, I don't know, McDonald's or Starbucks or something, they're not shut down. You know, it's like they just continue on. And they say, well, it was just this one teacher. But I say, look, if something like that goes on in a school, that one teacher's not the only one who knows about it. And the fact that these schools are allowed to continue on, like, you know, nothing's happened, is the whole thing's a disgrace. But that's a topic for another day, Phil. We're talking about CPTPP. It's so hard to say.
Awkward. I hate it.
Can we just talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? That's actually easier to say.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, it was going to be the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's what it was going to be. And then they all had to change what it was going to be when America. I don't know why they had to change the name all of a sudden. But, you know, I didn't follow it closely enough until it started coming in within our orbit.
Yeah. We've got some comments coming in about what they should teach in schools. Someone suggested critical thinking, which I definitely agree with, and civics, rather than teaching politics and economics. And look, as a politics graduate myself, I wouldn't want to inflict that on anyone else, but like civics, I think, is a really good lesson to learn. You know, why should you vote, how our political system works to an extent. You don't need to get into the history of it all and everything, but just having that understanding of what you can do to change the world that you live in positively.
When I've taught in colleges, you know, and in a college, unlike in a school, you do have a little bit of time to talk to students, and they, you know, and I have tried, particularly when elections are coming up, to explain to them, and I've never like pushed political ideas on them, but to at least explain the process of voting. What I always used to urge them is at least go and vote. You don't have to vote for a candidate. I would always say you don't have to vote for anyone. Go and spoil your ballot paper, because that way you are classed as having voted. And if enough young people do that, then all of a sudden it looks like young people's votes are up for grabs. You will suddenly start to see a lot of policies that you might find more attractive. I said, the reason you are turned off from politics is because you're thinking, well, where are the policies for us? Yeah. That any politician who understands how to win an election recognizes that they have to chase the votes that are going to get them elected. And that's not your votes, because you're not voting. It's like a vicious circle.
Yes.
So go along. You don't have to vote for anyone. Go along. Don't write anything rude, because it's not the politician reading it, you know, but just spoil your ballot paper. And if enough young people do that, they're not supporting any candidate if you don't like any candidate, but you will show up as your vote is suddenly up for grabs.
Yeah, indeed. Right, Phil, we're going to have to call it a night. We're only going to do half an hour, and we've yabbered on for an hour about this terrible, terrible trade deal that we've got. Oh, my God. I've got to laugh. I've got to laugh because otherwise I'll cry. And I said this earlier, but like, for me, having been to all of the countries that we have this new trade deal with, and many more besides, it just seems absolutely ridiculous, given that all this is on the other side of the world. And there is a thing called economic gravity. It exists, you know? It's like saying, I talked about it earlier, didn't I? I said it was like, it's like economics, it's like flat earth economics. That's what it is. It just doesn't take into account the reality of geography and the fact that these countries are like 10,000 miles away, and how that affects our trade with them. And we've got these really wealthy neighbours who are literally just 30 miles away, who we don't want to trade with because we've been told they're bad by the Murdoch media. It's, but, you know, we've got to laugh, haven't we, Phil? Yeah?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm such a cold. I still haven't. I've had a cold since the beginning of the year, Phil, and I still haven't got rid of it. I'm just going to jump into a couple of the chats before we go. It was Justin Trudeau, apparently, who required the name to change because of reasons. And Richard Marsden's written, did you hear on the news agents today about infected pork being put in the food chain? A woeful lack of inspectors. This new deal will encourage more opportunities for stuff like this. Yeah, indeed. Emmy saying follow on supporting safe air for classrooms, workplace again to gain support, talking about schools suffering from sick building syndrome, etc., affecting exam performance, which doesn't surprise me at all. A lot of kids are still learning in temporary classrooms on the playground.
I mean, I used to go on at my, when I worked in the college, I used to go on at my principals all the time, and they'd nod along. Yeah. I think in the end, managers learned to just nod along and ignore me. And I would say to them, why, if you want to get better results, why are you sticking them in this hall, which is cold because you put the heaters at the top of the room? I don't know who thought that up. And
because heat goes down, doesn't it? It's cold at the top of Everest, mate.
You can
explain that point, Dexter.
Yeah, it'll keep the shuttlecocks warm that are stuck in the rafters. You've got the clacking of heels as people walk up and down. You know, because it's boring invigilating. And I thought, why don't we? It'll require more invigilators, but put them in a more comfortable environment, put them in a classroom, you know, make sure it's obviously not a classroom where there's helpful posters for that particular subject, but put them in a classroom where it's more comfortable and they'll do better, you know, if you like, because it was a college that did quite well anyway. It's like, if you're just looking for that 1%, that just little extra boost, things like just making them more comfortable will help you reduce the levels of stress.
And also making sure that all the kids are fed properly, which is, I can't believe is an issue in one of the richest countries of the world.
And this was, to be fair, actually when Labour in power, but when I was at an FE college, when I was still a young teacher, full of new ideas and quite bolshy, I actually used to make my department pay for like butties, like sandwich, like a bacon or sausage sandwich and a vegetarian version as well for all my students. And I would say to them, right. And I used to make, well, if they didn't want to do it, they didn't want to do it. But I would get them in an hour early and I would say, right, here's some food for you. And then go through, and I would give them all the thing to get the blood flowing, to get the oxygen into their brain. So I'd give them something to eat that was, you know, protein and a bit of slow release carb, try and tell them not to have sugar. And then I would get them to have a little 15-minute walk before they went in, you know, again, it was just looking for that 1 or 2%.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
so
and sometimes that can make the world of difference.
Yeah,
okay. Just a big hello to Darren, who's just joined us. Hi there. And Emmy saying that she'd like to have a chat with us about, shielding kids and stuff like that. So yeah, if Emmy, you've got my number. If you want to give us a call, you're very welcome to. And Context is saying, hi. Oh, no, he's saying it's a Daily Blase. Okay. All right. Well, I'll be back on Monday at 9:30. And Phil, when's your next video going up? Do you know yet?
It went up as we were talking.
Oh, did it? Oh, wow. Look at that. Traffic. That's brilliant. Were you multitasking?
The next one will be tomorrow at noon.
That's really cool. And there will be a couple of videos going up over the weekend on Labour Social, including an interview I did with Professor Tom Brooks of Durham University, who wrote the paper on small boats, which showed that there were no small boats before 2018, and the Tories have just completely man-made this disaster because they know that it gets them votes. So that's an interesting chat. So look out for that. That'll be posted over the weekend. So in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Phil for doing this on the new Labour Social channel. And until next time, I'll say hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.